Hello, all. I am so sorry for the delay. Again, it's been another crazy week, but here is your recap of the February 3rd Greeley City Council meeting. The proclamation for Black History Month. I just wanted to do a shout out to a Greeley West student named Shiloh who gave an incredibly powerful speech around Black History Month. The fact that it is vast, it is not just about Martin Luther King or the civil rights movement, but it is worldwide, not just nationwide, and it's messy and it's painful, but also that people whose spirits were intended to be broken have risen above. So if you get a chance, I may end up pulling it and posting it separate, but she did a really beautiful job. Roth did the What's Great About Greeley. One of the notable things is Ames has their first workforce business in their innovation center, which is super cool. For citizen input, there were many who spoke. There was a mixture of people who came to speak around the resolution in terms of the funding going to performing arts rather than just the visual arts on both sides, those asking for that funding and speaking of the importance, and others speaking of concern around loss of funding for visual arts. In addition to speakers on that, we had Bill Gillard, who came to speak again about the public election and the fact that we could have saved money and should be listening to our community members. Kathy Hash and Mary Metzger spoke around the special election as well, and 1A, as well as concerns around City Council publicly endorsing no on 1A. Someone came to speak from the Water Valley Company to talk about the fact that this resolution needs to fail. And a small business owner, home builder, who spoke similarly to that of Water Valley. Steve Teets spoke about Day of Remembrance for those who have died in the unhoused population. That will be coming up on, I believe it's the 18th. I will find those details to make sure I say the right thing. Tom Dunkel spoke in support of no on 1A. I also spoke previous to him to share concerns around Greeley Forward and its practices, as well as our city council aligning with an organization that has actively worked to silence the voices of our community members, even in terms of hiding comments and blocking people who may show dissent or displeasure for the things they're doing, or even just question them. Peggy Sue Squires also spoke. She asked for a public debate between both yes and no on 1A sides, and also brought up the possibility of recall of our city council members if they continue to not listen to community members. Let's see, it went through a couple more people that spoke in terms of the funding for the arts. Connie Garcia spoke around the fact that the election, the city council serving in a quasi-judicial role, which was also brought up by others, and as such should be neutral. And so a lot of concern around, again, them taking an official stance. David Held came to speak on the ranch and the fact that as a whole complex, it was put on the ballot. There was a sales tax, and while the county has been transparent, it is still not generating a net profit, and this is over 20 years in. Rhonda Solis spoke about the water park that we're being compared to, which again was approved by voters, and so how that changes things, and the fact that yes on 1A buys time. And then Tom Shaner spoke about the fact that we shouldn't have to be here, and if it would have been listened to in the first place with the other petitions, we wouldn't be. As far as reports from Councilmember DeBeauty reminded about her meeting in the community every other week. Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem McDonald spoke about the fact that there are youth nominations open through GreeleyRec.com for scholarships, and if you know of any outstanding youth between 15 and 19 that could benefit from that, to go ahead and nominate them. Councilmember Roth spoke about doing a rapid rehousing ride-along. Councilmember Rudy shared that he went to Clearview Library District, was really impressed with them, and also did a Greeley PD ride-along with someone who happened to be a former student of his, so that's kind of cool. It was a great experience. And then Councilmember Butler discussed going to the Farm Show Scholarship Dinner, and the mayor was also in attendance at that. There was nothing new brought up in initiatives. The consent agenda passed with no items being pulled from it. So then moving on to the regular agenda, it was discussed, this was the one where whether or not council would decide to vote to publicly take a stance on 1A. There were speeches from virtually everyone on council with the exception of Mayor Hall, who basically said what everyone else, his speech was to say, well, basically what everyone else said. But there were some really good points raised by both Butler and Dubuque in terms of the fact that we are hurting the trust. The council is hurting the trust with the community. Brought up the concern of what else are people supposed to do when stripped of a voice, discussing the fact that the repeal on the zoning ordinance, of course, is not ideal. And when every other step that was taken, we were met with resistance, what else was there to do? He discussed the fact that consultants themselves had said that the project isn't feasible. Councilmember Rudy said that he believes that a vote was warranted. However, at this point, he feels that to challenge the zoning is something fundamentally different and that they are to be that quasi-judicial acting as judges, and it's about criteria. So he was worried about the precedent. He, of course, voted to support no on 1A. Councilmember Dubuque spoke around that in the same breath that council is saying that community voices matter, they are then saying how we should vote and that it is abusing the body, the council, to campaign on one side or the other. McDonald said that it wouldn't stop the project and that developers are watching. And so they then voted, and as expected, it was a split vote where Dubuque and Butler were both saying that no, we should not be taking a stance on 1A, and the remaining members of council voted that they would in fact be taking that stance of no on 1A. Then Housing and Homeless Team came up to share a presentation. They discussed that there are some significant concerns around funding, especially with federal freezes, and updated on grants that they've applied for and shifts that they're trying to make in order to make the money work for them. They made a very good point that catching people quickly is far cheaper. So if we can catch people who are on the verge of becoming unhoused, who are needing help with not getting evicted, with a month's bills, whatever, that actually saves us money. However, their grants are relatively limited in what they can do. So something that they wanted to look into. And then there was a pretty long discussion, which applied to the comments that were made during citizen input as far as the resolution on the funding for performing arts through Culture, Parks, and Recreation. They discussed various options. In terms, option A is a rental fee waiver for performing arts to use the UCCC. Option B is that a limited percentage of the public art money would go towards performing arts, and that we could look at a code amendment in terms of what the cap is on that. And then option C that was brought by Culture, Parks, and Rec was that the city manager could have a sponsorship program, but this would be more of a one-off. So initially Hall spoke and he said he didn't like any of the options and he would like things to stay the same, whereas other members of the council discussed changes that could be made, wanting to look into whether or not we can change the cap, whether we focus on legacy nonprofits as opposed to just any organizations, so the ones that have been in our community, such as Greeley Philharmonic, which has been here for over 100 years. Then let's see, I was trying to see if there's anything else kind of pertinent. So yeah, everyone just kind of discussed different options and ultimately asked that Culture, Parks, and Rec come back with additional options and research. So this will get tabled until further discussion. And then the council moved into executive session. So hope that kind of helps give a rundown. I think really the biggest thing that happened, the biggest decision was all of consent agenda going through, and then the fact that the council voted by majority to take a public stance on 1A and what they believe voters should vote. I did say this in either in my speech or in my overview of the agenda, that this isn't something that the council really does very frequently. The last time that I can remember them doing it was around the mill levy, but that wasn't actually city business. That was for the school district and showing support of the school district. And the council wasn't as divided in that. So kind of an interesting thing that they decided to take a stance in that, but we will see what happens. I believe at the work session is when they're supposed to finally get the summary of all feasibility reports together, and we'll go from there. Hope everyone's doing well.